Okay, I think we are live, so I will start. Um, Hello, I am Aruna from the Language and Learning Foundation, India. On behalf of the National Consortium for Multilingual Education, India, I take great pleasure today to welcome you all for the third talk in our webinar series. In our previous two webinars, we have looked at issues of translanguaging pedagogy and teacher training context in regards to a multilingual classroom. And today, we're continuing that trend. We turn our attention towards assessments in a multilingual classroom. And to take us into this journey, we have with us today Dr. Carol Benson. Before I begin with a short introduction of our keynote speaker, however, I would like to request the audience to select their audio language. On the bottom right of your screen, you'll see a globe icon. You can click on that and then select either the original audio, which is in English, as you're hearing now, or you can switch over to Hindi and then click on mute original audio if you want to listen to the presentation in Hindi. The instructions for these will be again posted in the chat for your reference a couple of times. मैं इस वेबिनार से में शामिल हुए सभी सहभागियों से दरखास्त करता हूं कि अगर आपको ये वेबिनार हिंदी में सुनना है तो आप कृपया अपनी ऑडियो भाषा का चयन करें। इसके लिए आप जो आपकी स्क्रीन है के नीचे दाएं राइट साइड पे आपको एक ग्लोब का आइकन मिलेगा। उस ग्लोब के आइकन को जो आप क्लिक करेंगे तो उसके बाद आप हिंदी भाषा सिलेक्ट कर सकते हैं। हिंदी भाषा का चयन करने के बाद आप म्यूट ओरिजिनल ऑडियो का बटन सिलेक्ट कर सकते हैं और उसके बाद आप ये वेबिनार हिंदी में सुन सकते हैं। आई एम नॉट डूइंग इट इन Hindi because as you can tell my Hindi is not my L1, so that's there. But we do have with us Juhi Jotwani, who speaks much better Hindi than me, who's going to do the interpretation from English to Hindi. We'll be posting the instructions for doing this again, both in English and Hindi on the chat for your reference. To speak about Dr. Carol Benson, she's a specialist in L1-based multilingual education who has worked in teacher education, curriculum development, and policy implementation in multilingual countries of the Asia and Pacific region, Africa, and Latin American regions as well. She has combined this with her academic work as an associate professor at Teachers College, Columbia University from 2014 to 2022, and she was also previously a guest lecturer at Stockholm University till 2011. She is currently developing an organization called NCMLEI International to make technical and human resources available for implementation of multilingual education in low-income contexts. Her scholarly interests include language in education policy change, the inclusion of indigenous and non-dominant languages in education, assessing emergent multilinguals, the link between multilingual education and the participation of female learners in it, and also creating a multilingual habitat in educational development. And with that, I'd like to invite Dr. Benson to begin with her presentation. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnab, for that great introduction. And thank you in advance to Juhi for the translations or interpretations. It's really a pleasure to be here. And thanks to the National Consortium for inviting me to do this talk. I've been working in multilingual education for a long time as a technical assistant. And I hope to continue doing that work through NCMLEI International, the organization that I'm working to start. But in the meantime, I'm doing talks like this about my experience and to share share experiences from around the world in implementing multilingual education. So I will share my PowerPoint. There we go. So you have some, I'm also very happy to share the entire PowerPoint presentation for anyone who wants it. So I think Arnab can help share that with participants later. Great, thanks. So I just have a few discussion points today, and they are these. I'll talk about some terms and concepts in multilingual education and in multilingual assessment. Then I'll talk about assessing in multiple languages, assessing in the L1 and assessing multilingually. And so these are the points that I will be discussing, and they come from a document that is about to come out from UNESCO and UNICEF in the Asia Pacific region. Our own dear Jingran helped and contributed to this document, as well as other scholars and specialists in MLE. And I just spoke yesterday at the Bangkok launch of this document, but it wasn't officially a launch because they don't have the final publication yet available, but it's coming very soon. So it's called Guidance for the Classroom Assessment of Multilingual Learners. It's coming. So here are the key terms that I wanted to share with you today. And these underlie an additive approach. That is an approach that thinks of languages as all contributing to a good education for young learners and even older learners. First, this term is fairly neutral, but it's a term that Kimmo Kosonen and I have used for a long time. Non-dominant and dominant languages. So non-dominant languages are often what we would call the home languages of learners that have traditionally been left out of formal education, and many of us have been trying to bring them into schools and teachers' practices. I also really like the term intersectionality because it describes what happens when many different factors interact to give learners access to education or prevent education. So these factors could be related to languages, ethnicity, race, gender, socioeconomic background, etc. And I think this term is really important to help people understand that learners in different contexts have different conditions for learning and for even getting to school. So I take a language as resource orientation. We've also called it a multilingual habitus or ideology. And this is an attitude that recognizes that learners enter the classroom with a lot of resources. They come with their own languages, their own funds of knowledge or experiences, their values, things they've learned from just living with their families, and so on. So learners are not a zero when they enter school. They bring with them a lot that we can build on as educators. And I really like this term. It comes from Ofelia Garcia's work. She used the term emergent bilinguals, and we've adapted it to emergent multilinguals. And that is the idea that learners may enter school with one strong language, but they have other languages in their environment and around them. And in the school, they're going to be developing multilingual skills, and they're going to be hopefully developing multi-literacies or multiple literacies, reading and writing in more than one language. So we're thinking of them as emergent multilinguals. They are growing, they are blooming in their multilingualism. So what happens when we assess only in one dominant language? So that is a dominant language would be like one national language or one international language. What happens when we only use that language to assess? And I think people know what happens because that's often what is going on in our schools. So one thing that happens is there can be low scores if learners don't speak that language or understand it. Scores are low, but we don't know why. This is a characteristic of the early grade reading assessment in many cases. You'll see lots of 0 scores, but we don't know why. The assessment results can't explain why. They just say, okay, 0. They couldn't do it. We also don't know what L1 literacy skills are available that could be transferred to L2. So we're only looking at L2, what's happening in that language. We don't know what's happening in the other languages of the learners. In addition, we don't know what learners have gained, what have they learned in content areas like sciences, social sciences. We don't know that because there are low scores. So there's a negative backwash on teaching. That is, it creates this negative effect on teaching where rote learning is what happens in the classroom. Children end up memorizing things that they don't understand. They can't think for themselves. They can't answer questions. And then there's a negative backwash on the whole education system because everyone's rushing to see some kind of results in the L2. And if you spend any time or effort developing L1, it's seen as stealing time from the L2. So all of these things reflect underlying attitudes that are also negative toward languages. They see languages as a problem. They have a monolingual habitus. That is, only one language is valued or important in people's attitudes and in the education system. So what happens when we assess in the L1 and additional languages? That is, if we're assessing bilingually or multilingually, what can we say then? So if scores are low, we know why, because it means that learners haven't gained the skills that they need in their languages to move forward. We also know what L1 literacy skills are available for transfer into additional languages because we know what kind of foundation is being built in the home language. We know if learners have content knowledge, like say in the sciences, if they're being assessed in both or all of their languages, they have an opportunity to show what they've been learning. So this creates a situation where there's a positive backwash on teaching. There's interaction between learners and teachers, and there's meaning making in the classroom. There's not just thoughtless repeating, but there's actual give and take. And then it creates a positive backwash on the education system because the L1 is now seen as important for all learning, which it is. But this kind of assessment would show that, help people understand that. That includes teachers. So the underlying attitudes that are reflected in this kind of assessing are treating languages as resources, having a multilingual habitus or perspective where all languages are important and they're important in life and they're important in education. So the logic of assessing multilingually in any classroom, this is where I tried to talk about, even if the classroom doesn't have L1 based multilingual education yet, here's why we should still assess multilingually. Obviously, no matter what language of instruction is being used, the L1 is learners' strongest language and the language in which they think. And I realize there's a challenge here because learners come sometimes with more than one L1. They come with multiple home languages. So we're hoping, even though we're saying L1, we're talking about a familiar language to the learner. So it may be one of their languages, but at least a strong one. if we link L1 and L2, or even L3, that will facilitate the development of an additional language. So if we can compare and contrast languages, starting with strong languages of the learners, that will facilitate the learning of a dominant language. Using both or all languages will allow teachers to document and improve the learning process and diagnose problems. These are the real purposes of assessment. They're not just for a grade or for determining who passes to the next level of education. It's really for the teachers to see if their messages are getting across, and can we move on to the next unit in school. So find out what the challenges are and change the teaching so that all learners can get up to that level of knowledge and then move forward. That's what assessment is for. So in conclusion, even if the language of instruction is an L2 or dominant language, learners should really be assessed, at least bilingually or multilingually or in the L1. This chart comes from Kathleen Hughes' work on looking at the results of different kinds of bilingual programs. And I won't talk about the whole thing, but it's one way to advocate for MLE. This chart shows that on the right-hand side, those blue columns show that the best results in L2 actually come from very strong MLE programs, either where the languages are used in parallel or where the L1 is a medium of instruction and L2 taught as a subject. So all of these other programs that are focusing on L2 do not have the best results, even in L2. And happy to share that with you so you can use it later in your advocacy and explaining to people. So what is the logic? Okay, thank you. I'm watching Juhi to make sure we're in together. What's the logic of assessing multilingually in L1-based multilingual education? Many of us, including myself, focused on assessing in the L2 in the past because we wanted to show that MLE based on L1 could result in good L2 skills. But what we forgot is that the L1 also, we need information about how children are doing in the L1. So we know that a good MLE program uses the L1 for initial literacy and also for teaching curricular content. It continues building L1 skills while learners are transferring skills into an L2 or an L3. So we're talking about transfer, not transition, which is taking away the L1, but keeping both or all languages in the system. And a good MLE program facilitates transfer by encouraging the comparison and contrasting of languages. So that means assessment should document progress in all of those aspects and improve the teaching of those aspects, looking at what L1 skills are available for transfer into additional languages or new languages, what L2, L3 skills are developing, and what content language has been learned. So I just want to note here, and this is true for any kind of education, but especially language learning, it involves making mistakes. That means that if the teacher is only looking for accurate answers on an assessment, we're missing some information. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about assessment on a scale or on a rubric so that we can see a process of learning and not just expecting correctness or incorrectness. So how can assessment be designed to more effectively capture everything that's going on in the school system? One more bit of background, and this includes not only assessment, but also teaching. This looks very complicated, but the concept is basic. It's called the two-track approach. It was developed by Susan and Dennis Malone, who many of you may know, who were long-time specialists in MLE implementation. And they said that this works very well to help teachers understand the language arts. So this is for L1 and L2 and L3, any languages in the classroom. And as you can see on the left, we're talking about listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So looking at the blue column, these are skills that focus on accuracy. They're either right or wrong. So in this case, the assessment can focus on, have learners learned them or not? So right or wrong, yes or no? B makes the sound B in English. I can't teach you any other language, but you understand that there are certain skills that are either correct or incorrect. So those are the skills that are taught in the accuracy track and assessed in that way. But looking at the green column, these are the aspects of language that are based on meaning. If I understand correctly, Arunab addressed you in Hindi and then apologized for his Hindi, which it's really sad that you would do that, because we're very lucky that we are multilinguals and we can make mistakes, but we can still communicate and make meaning. And that is what the green column is about. It's about making meaning. So these skills need to be developed in learners. They can understand a story, listen to a story, tell about things they do, link things to their own experiences, all of those things. Those are in the meaning track, and they would be assessed differently. They're not assessed as correct or incorrect, but how well are students developing these skills? So there's a process there. Thanks. So another aspect of assessment, often teachers will think that it's cheating to have information in the classroom, on the walls, things that learners can rely on or refer to when they're answering assessment questions or any questions. And one thing that's very important in early literacy is to have alphabet charts so that learners can refer to these things, especially in a bilingual or multilingual classroom. So this example comes from Senegal. It's from a bilingual program that was using Wolof, which is the alphabet on the left, children's home language or regional language for them, not everyone's home language, but a familiar language to learners. And then on the right, French, the dominant international language. It's a former colonial language of Senegal. So having these two alphabet charts there on the wall all the time is very useful for learners because they can refer to them. It will help them, it will scaffold their knowledge, give them some kind of structure. And then I have this other example from a German and Italian bilingual program in Europe where they actually integrated the alphabets. So the inner arches are the letters and sounds, and even the keywords that are almost the same or use the same sound in both languages, both Italian and German. And then the outer arches you may see that there are yellow sounds and letters that representing German that do not exist in Italian. And then also on the left, the blue sounds and letters, phonemes, I should say, that represent sounds that are special to Italian. So you can see that the comparison and contrast is built right into that integrated alphabet chart. I just love this. If anyone develops any of these in the languages that you're using, I would love to see it. Continuing with the idea of comparison and contrast, these are the kinds of charts that you would like to see on walls of bilingual or multilingual schools. This one comes from some recommendations that I made to a Rajbanshi Nepali English program in Nepal some years ago, where you could look, they were dealing with home language, Nepali and English, and just comparing the sentence structure, how you would start and end a sentence, if it's a sentence, a question, and then some key vocabulary for asking questions, like all of those who, what, where, how kind of questions. So I didn't fill all those in, but you can see them in English, and hopefully this is something that could also be used with other languages, possibly languages that you're working in. Here's an example. It looks very complex, but this is an example of a set of rubrics or criteria that teachers could use to grade any one learner's reading comprehension. So for example, one reader, when he or she is answering the questions, might be able to identify features of the text very well. So I've highlighted that one. And then that same learner might be able to guess meaning from context very well. However, that learner might not be able to make a lot of inferences, might partially identify the author's perspective, and then might very accurately identify cultural perspective. So as you can see, using a rubric allows the teacher and the learner to have some feedback on how that learner is progressing. It's not just a simple correct or incorrect, but there are levels of correctness or levels in the process. I have shown this before, and some of you may have seen it, but we experimented in Cambodia and also in Myanmar and Senegal with an expressive writing assessment. And what we did was we wanted learners to express their own ideas. So we used this prompt, "One night I dreamed," and asked them to talk about or write about their dreams. So we did that with the whole class. It was quite simple. Just gave them a piece of lined paper, asked them in their home language. I didn't administer the assessment, the teachers did. Asked them to write about a dream they had. And then also, if they were from grade 3 and up in Cambodia, we asked them afterwards to turn their paper over and write about a different dream in L2, which is Khmer, the national language of Cambodia. So first they were writing in their home languages. I'll write those. They were either Tampuan, Krung, or Bunong. And then if they were grade 3 and above, we asked them to turn the paper over and write in their L2. So this is the kind of assessment that has huge advantages over an assessment like the EGRA, which some of you may be familiar with, which is just looking for phoneme or letter recognition and very minor reading comprehension. If learners can write, then they can read. So it's encoding rather than decoding. It shows what learners can do. It shows that they can express themselves especially in their L1, but also in their L2. It focuses on productive skills. We can analyze their writing in many different ways. We can look at sentence length. We can look at spelling or orthography. We could look at penmanship, but here I think we're really looking for, can they express themselves? Can they make meaning in their language? And it shows teachers what might need to be retaught. It also had a positive backwash effect because teachers said, oh, I can do this as an exercise. I can teach my learners to write. And that's something that doesn't always get remembered by teachers. So here's some results. It may be a little bit difficult to understand this if you haven't seen it before, but we assessed learners from the same indigenous background who were in MLE programs and who were not. So you'll see MLE and then non-MLE below. So the MLE learners in their L1 wrote multiple sentences or long sentences. One wrote a short sentence and one just copied the information. So we know right there that one of them has not yet learned to read or write yet, and the other one is just starting, but most of them were doing very well. Then those same learners, very interestingly, wrote quite a bit in their second language. So this is grade 3, forgot to say that. This is grade 3. So when they turned their paper over and wrote in Khmer, the dominant language of the country, they actually did fairly well also. So the ones who wrote well in L1 also wrote well in L2. So there you have the MLE learners. Let's look at the non-MLE learners. So these are learners from the same language backgrounds. We tried to assess them in L1, just wondering if they could use any writing skills that they might have learned in Khmer to write in their home language, but they were not able to do that, or they were afraid to do that. So zero scores in L1. And then when we asked them to write in Khmer, the language of instruction for them, we had just the prompt, which they copied from the board. One night I dreamed, basically. And then they filled in one word or one noun. So my uncle, a monkey, a bird. So they were not really able to express themselves well in the L2. So you can see a big difference. And the difference we were able to show because the MLE learners we could show what they can do in their L1, and then we can see that it contributes to L2 self-expression as well. So we're very proud of the MLE learners. I should add, sorry, Juhi, this is new information, but I should add that one class that we assessed, none of the MLE learners could do this. And so that told us that something was wrong with their teacher. Yeah, we found out later that teacher had been absent a lot, was having a drinking problem. It was really sad. But we were able to catch that because of this assessment. Thanks. We're near the end, but I did want to show you a parallel assessment. And this is actually a worksheet and an assessment. The assessment questions are on the next slide. I couldn't get the whole thing on one slide. So this is an example from my colleagues at the University of Cape Town. So the left column has information about pollination and fertilization in plants. In English, the L2, it's actually L3. And then on the right column is information in Isikosa, which is learner's first language. And yes, it has a click in it. Isn't that wonderful? So here's the information. It's translated, exact translation, both languages. Then we have keywords, and then at the bottom of the worksheet are questions, assessment questions. What did learners actually get out of the lesson? These questions are available in both languages. They could be answered in both languages. And what happened was that the teachers who were asked to experiment with this kind of assessment were very happily shocked at the answers, because they found that learners had gained a lot from the lessons, but it was only when they were allowed to use their home languages where they could really show what they had learned. And I should add that the lesson was more than just this worksheet, right? The teachers were teaching about this topic. So my colleagues got a really good response from teachers. They said that it takes extra time, of course, because for making sure that something is available in both languages, it takes some time from the teacher, but it's well worthwhile because they show what learners really have gained from the lessons. So finally, I think we just had some messages in these guidelines that are coming out about rethinking assessment with multilingual, emergent multilingual learners in mind. So one point is to just remind everyone to assess literacy skills in the L1 and in both languages, because you're trying to facilitate that transfer of skills from L1 to L2 or L3. We need to demonstrate progress, especially in L2, without requiring accuracy all the time. So thinking about skills as assessed on a continuum or a scale or rubrics or criteria, not just right or wrong. We need to think about assessing other curricular content, math, science, social sciences, bilingually or multilingually. There are many ways to do that, more than just the side-by-side. So there are some resources in this upcoming guidelines text that hopefully will be useful to you. And next steps, I threw this in. It's not in the guidelines because I think it's a challenge to all of us to start thinking about assessing the superpowers of emergent multilinguals, because they are developing metalinguistic awareness. That is something that I think probably everyone here has, because we are multilinguals and we know that we get a lot of superpowers from our ability not only to communicate in all of our languages, but there's a lot happening in our brains that is not happening in the brains of monolinguals or people who have not developed multilingual skills. So the challenge to all of us is to find new things to assess that show all of the benefits of multilingualism. And we're calling that superpowers. You can help me if you have some ideas about how to do that. So these were the people who helped with the guidelines that are coming out, the guidelines from the Asia Pacific region. I tried to grab a few languages, written languages, to say thank you. And I'll say thank you to all of you for participating. And we'll go on to questions. So back to you, Arunab.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Yeah, so I'll just summarize the questions. We have received a couple of questions, so we'll not take every question. I'll try to bring together two questions for the for time.
Right.
So basically, I think one of the questions that's prominently coming across is that there seems to be a lot of greater focus on the meaning track, right? When we are assessing multilingually. So then what are some of the rubrics that can be there to sort of assess their skills in accuracy? One is that is one question. Second, I think another question that is coming through is that when we are talking about assessments, mostly assessments happens about reading and writing. Then in which context do assessments for listening and speaking fit in this MLE program?
Oh, good. Really good questions. Um, in the guidelines, what I tried to do is give suggestions or ideas for each of those things. So, excuse me, one of the, if we're thinking about oral skills, listening and speaking, those can also be assessed on a scale from low ability to express oneself to fluent or fluid ability to express oneself. Should I stop there
I
and
think the
continue
interpretation
for?
is still on, so we'll just turn it off, and maybe you can continue, and then Juhi can come in to sit to just. Oh, it's off. Yeah,
It's off.
Juhi, you can translate. Yeah.
आने वाली गाइडलाइंस में डॉक्टर बेंसन और सुझावों को देने वाली हैं कि किन तरीकों से मौखिक कौशल जो होते हैं जैसे कि बोलना और सुनना इनको किन तरीकों से एक सातत्य में देख सकते हैं बल्कि सही और गलत के.
And maybe I can just share the slide again. This one. See if I can make it bigger. There, can you see that one? The accuracy and meaning. So there are some examples here for how to assess. In the meaning track, I think the important thing is that meaning is coming across, right? And that learners are connecting, let's say, a story or someone's experiences to their own experiences. So it's not exactly the type of assessment that we would think of as a test, but rather checking to see that they're doing that and that there has been progress in their linking their experiences to new experiences in a new language, for example.
जैसे कि हम हरे कॉलम में देख सकते हैं जो मीनिंग की ट्रैक है अर्थ की ट्रैक उसमें हम देख सकते हैं कि कुछ कुछ गतिविधियां या आकलन ऐसे किया जा रहा है कि हम कैसे जो हम पढ़ रहे हैं या किस कहानी को पढ़ रहे हैं हम कैसे उसे अपने अनुभव से अपने से जोड़ सकते हैं. अब ये सामान्य रूप में किसी टेस्ट की तरह लगता नहीं है बल्कि ये एक्चुअली चेक इन की तरह है. बस समझने के लिए इसका मकसद बस इतना है कि ये जानने के लिए कि क्या हम आगे बढ़ पा रहे हैं क्या हम नए अनुभवों को अपनी नई भाषा में देख पा रहे हैं समझ पा रहे हैं सोच पा रहे हैं बोल पा रहे हैं. इसका मकसद एक्चुअली उतना ही है चाहे ये सामान्य किसी टेस्ट या एग्जाम की तरह ना दिखे.
Maybe I can give that example from the writing assessment that I was talking about, where learners are asked to write about an experience or a dream or something familiar. It could actually be assessed in terms of correctness, for example, spelling. But in that case, the implication is not that the teacher is going to correct every single word, but that the teacher sees, oh, many students are having problem with this letter or this word, so I'm going to reteach this part of spelling or orthography or accents or tone markings, whatever it is, that the teacher sees, okay, they haven't quite gotten there with this. So it's not going to be correcting every every letter or every aspect of the words, but actually reteaching so that learners improve their ability to write in their languages, L1 or L2.
अगर हम लिखने के कौशल पे देखें तो जैसे लिखने के कौशल में अगर हम सटीकता को ही देख रहे हैं अगर और हाँ अगर किसी शिक्षक को नजर आ रहा है कि रिजल्ट में कई सारी स्पेलिंग्स यानी कि वर्तनी गलत हैं तो इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि वो शिक्षक हर चीज़ को सही करेंगी या हर स्पेलिंग को सही करेंगी या बस ये मान लेंगे कि ये गलत परिणाम है बल्कि उन्हें ये भी समझ में आएगा कि कौन सी वो चीज़ें हैं जो वापस सिखानी है वो कौन से शब्द हैं जिनमें सबसे ज्यादा दिक्कत हो रही है और उन शब्दों को वापस कैसे सिखाया जा सकता है किन तरीकों से उन शब्द को समझाया जा सकता है एक कक्षा में तो मकसद असल में वो है बस करेक्ट करना नहीं
Thanks.
Thank you so much for the translation and also for the responses. Just to sort of continue on this tangent about assessment in terms of accuracy and also like spellings and all we are talking about, right? Because as language teachers, because the way we are trained, a lot of fixation happens around accuracy, whereas meaning making is sort of relegated towards like higher grades, right? When we are sort of talking about primary grades, there's a lot of conversation about language accuracy and all. But and in that context, I think there are two questions which sort of are similarly phrased around translanguaging. So the questions being whether when we are talking about assessments, if the people are translanguaging, what are the rubrics for assessment there? Or when we are doing written activities, but then are they writing in the same language? Are they writing in mixed language? So what is the sort of the assessment rubric there? Juhi, if you could just translate the last bit of this question, and then Dr. Carol can respond.
अगर एक शिक्षार्थी सिर्फ एक ही भाषा में अपना उत्तर नहीं लिख रहे हैं बल्कि ट्रांस लैंग्वेजिंग कर रहे हैं तो फिर कैसे मूल्यांकन किया जाए फिर कैसे आकलन किया जाए ये सवाल है
Thanks for those questions. Yes, so we tried to give some examples of what could be done. Let's say there's a regional or national assessment being administered in a classroom. The teacher could do oral L1 to help learners understand what is being required by the assessment. And I would argue that that's not cheating. That's giving them access to the examination, right? It's giving them access to what they're being asked to do in the L2 or L3. Maybe I should stop there, Juhi, and then continue.
जब अगर ऐसा हो तो एक मौखिक रूप से भी शिक्षक L1 भाषा में बता सकते हैं कि उन शिक्षार्थियों से क्या मूल्यांकन में क्या करने की उम्मीद की जा रही है क्या अपेक्षा की जा रही है L2 में और उन्हें L1 में शिक्षक का ये बताना एक मौखिक रूप से ये कोई धोखाधड़ी नहीं है बल्कि इससे ज़रूरी होता है इससे ये होता है कि शिक्षार्थी समझ पाते हैं कि ये क्यों किया जा रहा है और क्या मकसद है इस मूल्यांकन का अरुणा आई एम नॉट श्योर बट क्या ये सही था जो मैंने बोला
So far, okay, good. And then for classroom assessment, of course, one thing I forgot to mention with the content assessment, for example, in the sciences, I want teachers to understand that they should not be correcting language in a science test. They should be looking for content knowledge on a science test. So to me, it doesn't matter which languages the information has been taught in or how learners are processing that in multiple languages, as long as the understandings have been reached. So I think that's what's important. So when you're talking about translanguaging or code switching, whatever the switching, whatever the language is, in content instruction, the important thing is the knowledge, the facts, or what learners are getting from the lesson.
तो अगर हम एक ऐसे सब्जेक्ट को लें जैसे कि है विज्ञान, तो विज्ञान के मूल्यांकन में एनीवे भाषा को का मूल्यांकन ना किया जाए और स्पेलिंग पे फोकस करने का कोई मतलब नहीं बनता है, क्योंकि मकसद ये है कि क्या उन तक विज्ञान की चीज़ पहुंची है या नहीं, क्या उन तक वो ज्ञान पहुंचा है या नहीं। अब वो ज्ञान चाहे L1 में हो या L2 में हो, जरूरी चीज वो है, ना कि भाषा का सही होना। तो इसके लिए ट्रांस लैंग्वेजिंग भी अगर हो तो भी ध्यान में रखा जाए कि एक मूल्यांकन का मकसद क्या है, खासकर कि दूसरे सब्जेक्ट्स में।
The thing about language, these are good questions because, of course, if you are teaching L2, let's say, then you will want to assess in L2 most of the time. But sometimes there could be an advantage to assessing L2 in L1 to find out what learners are understanding of the L2, or allowing them to switch, because again, it should be meaning-based rather than always focusing on accuracy. Perhaps you could say that if it's accuracy being tested in L2, then the assessment should be in L2 to find out what they have learned. But if the focus is on meaning in the L2, then errors are okay, and switching to L1 is okay to get the meaning.
और L2 और L1 के बीच में मूल्यांकन में खेल भी सकते हैं। यानी कि अगर सटीकता देखनी है तो अगर एक L2 भाषा में सटीकता देखनी है तो L2 में ही मूल्यांकन किया जाए, सीधी सी बात है। पर अगर अर्थ निर्माण को देखना है तो असल में उसके लिए L2 में चाहे L1 भी हो तो भी अर्थ क्या पहुंचा है, अर्थ निर्माण किस तरीके से एक शिक्षार्थी में हो रहा है, वो हम समझ सकते हैं, चाहे वो सिर्फ L2 भाषा में उसका मूल्यांकन हम ना देखें। इनफैक्ट L2 का मूल्यांकन अगर L1 में किया जाए तो वो भी बहुत दिलचस्प हो सकता है, क्योंकि उससे हमें पता चल सकता है कि कितना L2 समझ पा रहे हैं और कितना वो रट रहे हैं।
Yes. I hope that answers those questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just because of the paucity of time, I think we'll take one more question that is emerging from this conversation. And that is particularly regarding the assessments in terms of metalinguistic awareness, right? Because whenever we are talking about L1 and L2 and other different languages and their assessments, most of the times we are assessing metalinguistic awareness. But the question of the sort of the topic of this presentation is assessing multilingual learners multilingually, and the assessment is not of their multilingualist like nature or the multilingualic what we call whatever adjective we want to put there, right? So in that context, specifically in say primary grades, when students come in, one, there is a natural acquisition of different languages, right? And through that, metalinguistic awareness can be built. But apart from assessments that focus on metalinguistic awareness, for lower grades, what are the sort of the workarounds that we can sort of have which can encourage metalinguistic awareness, but not necessarily test it?
Yeah. So the topic here is assessment, but of course, one thing that I didn't talk about is that there are a lot of activities that could just be teaching activities, but they're also offering teachers an opportunity to check they can use it as formative assessment, right? They can look at how the learners are answering or how they're participating, and that tells the teacher where are they in the learning process. So we tried to give some recommendations of activities as well that can function as forms of assessment for teachers to see where learners have where are they in the process? Sorry, I'm trying to remember any of those comparison contrasts. I know, I can give an example. And this was for young kids. Let me show that alphabet chart again. Do I have time? I'll try to do it quickly.
As you're looking for it, maybe Juhi can translate.
तो यहाँ सवाल ये था कि जो शुरुआती कक्षाओं में जो शिक्षार्थी हैं उनकी हम उनकी धातु भाषा जागरूकता यानी कि मेटालिंग्विस्टिक अवेयरनेस किस तरीके से समझी जा सकती है बिना ज़रूरी से उसका मूल्यांकन किए। ये था सवाल। और इसमें डॉक्टर बेंसन बता रही हैं कि इंटरेस्टिंग गतिविधियां, काफ़ी दिलचस्प गतिविधियां शिक्षक कर सकते हैं इन कक्षाओं में, जिनमें वो ऐसा भी नहीं कि वो कोई एग्जाम या टेस्ट है, बट इन गतिविधियों से वो शिक्षक समझ सकते हैं कि क्या हो रहा है, कौन सी बात समझ में आ रही है शिक्षार्थियों को और कौन सी वापस समझानी पड़ेंगी।
Thanks. So I have this example, that integrated alphabet chart, the one that looks kind of like a rainbow. I saw it used in this program, and learners had, they were coming, so they were young learners. They had been asked to bring something from home. So maybe they brought something from the kitchen or just something they had at home. And they brought it into the classroom, and each child was asked to stand up, show the thing that they had brought. Okay, so maybe a cup. Say the word in one of these languages, either Italian or German. And because they were learning their letters, they were asked to go to the chart and show the letter that it started with. So if I did this in English, I would say cup, and I would try to find either the C or the K on the chart. And I would say the word, I would point to the letter and say, it starts with this letter. And then what the teacher was doing as a learning activity was to ask the kids, okay, how would you say this in the other language? And does it start with the same sound or a different sound? Can you show me on the chart which sound it starts with, etc.? So it was a testing situation, but also a teaching situation combined using that chart.
जैसे हम जो दाईं तरफ हमें जो तस्वीर नजर आ रही है, जिसको हमने एकीकृत अक्षर कहा था प्रस्तुति के दौरान, उसमें डॉक्टर बेंसन हमें बता रही हैं कि एक गतिविधि की गई थी, स्टूडेंट्स ने गतिविधि की गई थी शिक्षक ने, वो ये थी कि शिक्षार्थियों को अपने घरों से कुछ एक एक कोई भी वस्तु लानी थी और उस वस्तु को पूरी कक्षा को दिखाना था और कहना था कि वो उस वस्तु को क्या बुलाते हैं। अब वो चाहे वो L1 में बुलाएं या L2 में बुलाएं, बट उसे बुलाते क्या है। फिर उन्हें जाना था इस चार्ट की ओर और वो जो भी उसको बुलाते हैं, जैसे कि डॉक्टर बेंसन ने उदाहरण दिया कप का, तो अगर वो कप लें तो वो सबसे पहले उसकी शुरुआती आवाज पॉइंट करें जिस भाषा में उन्होंने कहा, और फिर वो जो दूसरी भाषा है जो L2 है उसमें कोशिश करें कहने की कि क्या होगा उसकी शुरुआती आवाज क्या होगी और उस तरफ वो पॉइंट करें। इससे हम समझ पाते हैं कि ये एक मूल्यांकन भी यहाँ हो रहा है और शिक्षा भी यहीं हो रही है, दोनों एक ही गतिविधि से हम दोनों कर पा रहे हैं। यू आर म्यूटेड अरुणा।
Sorry, technology often beats me at this junctures. I was saying thank you so much for the responses and also the presentation as a whole, and also thank you to all of the participants who were with us for the last hour and listening to us, engaging with us. And also special thanks to Juhi, because I have also done interpretation to Assamese, and it's a very difficult job. And Juhi, I think, has done remarkably well in that context. So I'll ask Juhi to give the end note, maybe just have a line in Hindi to end the conversation, as we all say, Bye. And we hope that the guidelines will, we get to read the project, the document that comes out of the project, and that will inform our further programs and activities surrounding the MLE space, not just in India, but around the globe as well. Thank you so much.
सबका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया जो भी जुड़े, जिन भी पार्टिसिपेंट ने हमारे साथ यहाँ बातचीत की, सवाल पूछे, पूरे बातचीत में हमारे साथ जुड़े रहे, उन सबका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया था। और उम्मीद है कि आगे जाके जो गाइडलाइन निकल के आएंगी इस पूरे प्रोजेक्ट से, उससे भी हमारे आगे जाके जो भी हम प्रोग्राम पे काम करेंगे, जहाँ भी बहुभाषी शिक्षा इस्तेमाल की जाती है, वहाँ और विकास होगा उन सब प्रोग्राम्स का, जब ये गाइडलाइंस हम पढ़ पाएंगे, अपने लिए उनका उपयोग कर पाएंगे।
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure. Take care, everyone.